All right, today I'm going to go over the rigging part of our assignment. So hopefully by today, the person who did the character has a character drawn, the person who did the background has a background drawn, and by the end of the day, you're able to swap those two things and then start working on the opposite piece. To go through what the assignment is in this for this piece, the assignment sheet, this is a parallax environment. The due date will be 11/2, so that'll take us all the way through this week, all the way through next week, and it'll be due on that Saturday. Remember, you can come in on the Saturday to turn it in, or if you have it done by Wednesday, you can turn it in then. Ideally, this rigging part we're going to do now should speed up all of our animation stuff. So we can really just focus on the animation part, and then we'll see from there where it's at. So we're working within a 3D environment inside of After Effects. We're understanding rigging and animating of a simple character and environment. Try to put that in there too. And environment. There we go. So we sketched assets and characters for an environment in Illustrator. We use 3D layers to create a look of parallax. So that's what we're going to do today. Rig a basic character to be controlled in a different comp. We'll do that today. Animating, moving through an environment with the character animation. Now everyone will have a different way that they're animating their character. Some of you may do like the camera is kind of coming through your scene and the character would do something at the end, or you're kind of following the character as it's moving through a scene. That's another thing that you could do. Ideally, we just want to make sure that we're showing off all the stuff that we've done, okay? And everyone will animate their own stuff. Once we get all the stuff rigged, you'll then swap it again, and then whoever had, or you'll animate all your stuff in the character and the environment for each person. You'll add sound effects. Simple sound effects is great to add. Music is definitely something that will add something to it as well. Title and transition to video. We should be turning in our artwork, so the environment, element, and character. And then obviously any of the stuff that we sketched out ahead of time as well. Okay, so your Illustrator stuff will definitely be in, but then also your sketches that you've done too. Your project folder, your movie, your artwork, latest files, your movie, 1280 by 720, 24 frames per second, and 14 points possible. Yes, sir. How to do what? Yeah, that's what I'm going to go over today. Oh, okay. The part of how to rig it so we can do that kind of stuff. Yep. Okay, so I will print the sheet and then get into it. All right, so I have just some very simple scenes here just so the process isn't compounded with a bunch of extra stuff. The process is going to be exactly the same regardless of your environment. It's just going to have different things. You might have 15 layers and I have 5 layers. You might have 20 things animating on the bird and I'm going to have 3 things animating on the bird. Okay? I'm going to try to cover as many bases as I can so that I hit on all the major topics that we would have. Okay? So this is my environment. I've set it up so that I have my foreground layer. I have my color bars over here. I can just throw those on the bottom. I really don't need that right now. I have a cloud layer there, a cloud layer here, a cloud layer there. Layer 9 is apparently nothing. I'm not sure what's on layer 9. I just use this just to get some colors. So I would like be able to swap colors. So you don't need that. That's just for color selection. Okay, so there's all my mountains. All those are on theirs. There's my hills. I have some single mountains way up here. Something happened with my other mountain. It was not on a layer. That single mountain there, and this one should be on single mountain 2. There we go. Okay. I have a mountain range right here, and then I have another mountain range right there, and then I have a gradient. Cool. So I'm saving that. And then for my bird, same setup. I have my color bars here. And again, just for selection of colors, that's all that's there for. I have my right pupil, my left pupil on separate layers. I have a back feather, a front feather, a middle feather. Those are all on separate layers as well. I have the beak open. Hide that. Oops, I did that one too. There we go. So there's beak closed. There's beak open. And then this one I'm going to split into two so that I could animate them separately. So I'm just going to have beak top and beak bottom. Where did you go? Drag this into there. There we go. Beak top. And this again is just to kind of show different ways that I could animate this. I mentioned before you could have it where it's transitioning between these beak mouth opening and closing spots, or you can do different poses of the beak's closed, the beak's open, the beak's closed, the beak's open, and After Effects will basically jump between those two. Works the same way for blinks. It works the same way if I'm turning him from left to front to right or whatever. Doesn't matter, it's just a different pose that I would be going through. So I have obviously different options here for mine specifically. Here's his skin. And these are all on the same layer, which are fine because those will actually be all animated together. So as like he squishes down, those whites of his eyes would also squish. The pupils wouldn't. I always want the pupils to stay round and be able to manipulate them. But like his eyes themselves can kind of squish down and stretch out. If I didn't want those, I could separate those, put those on different layers as well. I'm going to leave them on there. These things too, if I decided I wanted to animate these, let's say moving up or down, I would put those on separate layers. But I think they're going to be good there. All right, so it looks like a mess in here, but it's fine. We're going to save that. All right, so now I'm going to go into After Effects, and I'm just going to import my stuff. So you would swap your stuff, and then one person would be importing the environment, one person would be importing the background. Or the character, sorry, yes. I said the same thing twice, didn't I? So we're going to be importing each one the same way. So everything we import from Illustrator from now on is typically going to be set up like this. You click the item, you go to Composition, Retain Layer Size, and then you hit Import. So we'll do the background first. That's going to be not the simpler one, but the less guessing one, let's put it that way. So I have a background here. I have all my layers right there. I'm going to double click the background, and now I'm inside the background. Now remember, this is twice as big. That's fine because we want it to be twice as big so that we have this ability to move things closer or further away from our environment, okay? So I'm going to reset this composition to 1280 by 720. Oops. Make sure this is at 24 frames per second. Make sure this is, I can probably leave this at 60 seconds. It's probably plenty long for what we're going to need. And background, there we go. Okay, now everything just like, we lost half of our stuff. But again, that's fine because we're going to be repositioning this in Z space to push things back and move things forward. All right. Let's get that up. So first thing I need to do is make sure everything is 3D. So everything is 3D by clicking that button on. And what that does is allow me to go into the position of this and have this other Z control. That way I can control the depth of these things, okay? Now what we have to do is look at what kind of positioning we want to have on our stuff. So looking at the background here, it's pretty straightforward as to what is in front and what is in back. This stuff is in front. This stuff is kind of like in the middle ground. This is behind that in the middle ground. This is in the background. This is in the way background, and these clouds are kind of somewhere probably between the mountains and the background there, okay? So you have to think of this like if you had these cut out on a piece of paper, how would you layer these so that you can see exactly what they would look like? You can kind of think of this as a shoebox, what's it called, diorama. There we go. Okay, so if you look at some of these like, that one, you can see how there's different layers and different areas where these things are kind of staggered in front of. Same thing here. You have this ground, you have these things, you have the background here. Same thing. Oops. Where'd it go? There. You can see there's a flat piece of ground, there's this castle, there's something in the background, there's other stuff kind of floating. Okay? So if you think of it like that, it makes it a little bit simpler. Now in this, I don't have anything, like if I'm going to go into the scene, typically I'd want to have a ground plane. So I saw a couple people working on this where they would have an area that's going to be like flat laying down, okay? And that's fine, I'll show how to do that. But just be aware that that's not going to be just like this staggered sheet of paper like this. You'll actually be rotating some of these pieces, okay? So first thing I want to do is just get everything in a rough position. So I'm going to start off with the very, very back layer, which is layer 14, which should have been renamed to background. And I'm just going to go to the position, and I'm going to set the Z position. Now this should be super far back. So if I go to the positive direction, this pushes it backwards. It seems weird, but it's how it works. And I'm going to go to about 5,000, I think, and that should be a good amount. If you can't see it happening, you can always solo the layer, and that makes it easier to see as you're moving the layer of what that one layer is doing. Okay? So actually 6,000 seems to be like filling that pretty good still. Good. The next layer are the mountain ranges, so I'm going to go into the position of that, and I'm going to move that back as well. Now you'll see that I'll hit a spot where the bottom of this is showing through. That's fine. I'm going to ignore the fact that it's showing through, and then once I start layering other stuff, hopefully it'll cover it up, and if it doesn't, I'll have to adjust its position. Okay, so this is going to be somewhere not past 6,000 because 6,000 is as far back as my shoe box is going to go. Everything else needs to fit within that range. Okay, so let's say these are mountains, so they're way in the back, so maybe they're at like 5,000. Okay, now they're tiny, that's fine. Again, we can scale things up. My other mountain range, maybe it's at 4,500. Okay, once you have a starting number, you can really kind of position things using just really any number within there. This one's way over here. I'm going to scoot this into this area. And you can see like this is a good one to kind of cover up some of these spots where I may have a hole. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to grab this one. Maybe I'll put this one at 40 to 50 or something like that. Okay, and I have basically these two ranges. Those are going to give me some parallax, and then these other ones are going to give me a little bit more depth. Okay, it might be subtle, but that's really what helps kind of sell the illusion of this. And now I'm just kind of duplicating and staggering these a little bit so that I have a little bit more variety. 350. There we go. Maybe I'll scale that one up a little bit too. Scale this one up as well. I think I want to push that one back even further, maybe behind the other ones, 5,500. There we go. All right, so that seems good. All right, so let's close those. I'm going to go to the hill range. My other mountains were at about the 4,000, 5,000 range, so these will be at like the 3,000 range. You can see it covered it up right away. Yeah. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Here's my individual hills. Those will be somewhere in maybe the 2,500 range for this one, 2,800 there, 2,200 there. I'll skip the clouds for now. Let me go to my foreground. And this will be at 0 basically, or I guess I can put this at 1,000. I think that would be fine. That up. Okay, so you'll see that from here to this is not the exact layout, and that's fine. We're able to customize it, but this gets us closer to where we need to be. Okay, if we need to adjust any positions, obviously we can just grab stuff and move it. I have no idea what I just grabbed. There we go. Right, we can adjust positions of things. Obviously this I don't want to be up that high. Maybe I want these to be a little bit closer together. That looks better. And maybe I'll duplicate this and bring that over. Let me rotate it some. I think that might be better. Oops. There we go. And I think maybe these two I want to push off a little bit. Hill there, hill there. Scooch over. Okay, now everything kind of fits really nicely inside this area, but I want to have some control over it, especially my partner in here. I want to be able to pass off control to my partner and allow them to tweak what it's looking like, okay? So let's say that they wanted something where the hills were maybe further back or the mountains were further down or something like that. So one thing you're going to have to talk about with your partner are what kind of controls that you're going to want on stuff like the background. So some things that we're going to want is maybe the depth of the items. Oops, let me make this background first. Okay, so we want to give that to our partner so that they can control the depth. The narrower that depth is, the tighter it's going to feel, okay? The less parallax we're going to get. The deeper it is, the more parallax we're going to get. So think of it like if you've ever seen any of the Hitchcock movies where they do these, it starts with a V, I can't remember the effect, but they like zoom in on a person as the background is like slamming into them. Vertigo, thank you. The vertigo effect. That's the kind of thing you can get where you can really like squish all the elements together, or you can spread them apart. So different things you may want to do. So depth of items obviously is something we'd want to be able to control. But let's see, we also want to be able to control, like in this case I have clouds, so I want to be able to control the clouds' speed. Okay, I want to set up their speed so they start moving across the scene, but I want to be able to control how the clouds are moving. We're also going to have a camera, so we want to be able to control the camera's movement and rotation. And then we'll jump back into this and do some other stuff, okay? So let me bring my clouds in here because I totally forgot about positioning them. And if my mountains are at 4250, then my clouds are probably going to be, you know, somewhere within that range. So maybe this one's at 4000, maybe this one's at 3500, maybe this one is at 4500. Let's bring that one down. There we go. Bring this one down. There we go. Okay. All right, so that looks pretty good. I do have a line right there, but I think that's just... I don't know what that line is. Is that for my cloud? Yeah, there's a line on my cloud. Let's go see what that is. Sometimes you'll get these like weird little lines or something, and they don't really do anything. Nope, that's definitely there, because when I select this cloud, I'm getting a line at the bottom. So let me isolate this. Oops. There we go. Yep, there's a line. I'm just going to delete it, and then save. And then when I come back to After Effects, there it goes away. Good. All right, cool. All right, and it looks like this cloud might also have a line. Yep, there's still something there, so let's go hit the right button. There we go. Yep, I don't know if that happened. Oh, that was on my hill. How'd you get there? Drag that down to that. And again, save. There we go. Cool. All right, so we're going to create a controller here. So I'm going to go to New Null. Every time you see a rig, typically you're going to see a null is going to be the controller. It's a nothing object. It doesn't render. It's just an easy way for us to select stuff. Sometimes you'll actually see like images that are used as a controller. In this case, we're just going to use this null. So I'm going to relabel this as background controller. Okay. So I can pretty much set this wherever I want. This is not going to move the background at all. It's mainly going to be used as just sliders that I would use to control it. So just to keep it out of the way, I'm going to put this up here. When we do the Angry Bird, or the character, he'll have a more substantive role of where this is, okay? So I'm going to go to Effect, I'm going to go to Expression Control, and inside here are different ways that we can control different items, okay? These are basically sliders, buttons, knobs, controlling items that will then link to other properties, okay? So just as a for instance, I want to control the speed of the mountains, or the speed of the clouds. So I'm going to go to a point slider. No, I don't want that one. I want to go to expression. I'm going to go to slider control. There we go. Okay. Now this one has one number. Let me go back to the point control. This one has two numbers. Let me go back to expression control again. And 3-point control, and you'll see this one has 3 numbers, okay? Depending on what you're trying to control, you would need different properties. If I want to give someone control of the pupils, it helps to be able to move it left and right and up and down. So I would use the 2-point control for that. If I just need to have something that is a number I can feed into it, like speed, speed is typically going to be like one number. So the clouds going across a screen, even though they're moving in one direction, I can just use that one slider, right? So I don't need the up and down for that because the clouds wouldn't be moving up and down as well. So I'm going to label this one Cloud Speed. Okay, and I'm going to tie all those together so that all the clouds will move at the same speed. It'll all be consistent, and we won't have clouds like, they're all pretty much in the same range. We won't have some that are like zipping across the screen and other ones that are going super slow. They'll be at a constant rate. Okay, so I'm going to go to Position, Position, and Position. And this is where I need to do some expression writing to get this. Now, sometimes you'll see this. When you right-click on something like Position, you'll see this thing that says Separate Dimensions. And if I click on that, it actually allows me to separate the X, the Y, and the Z. Now, this speeds up my workflow because I don't have to worry about doing any crazy expressions like we did before, where we're making an array and then assigning different parts of that to the array, okay? Here I can just say, okay, the clouds are going to move in the X direction, okay? So I can just control just the X. So I'm going to slide the clouds over here like this. And I'm going to do the same thing on this cloud. And I'm going to do the same thing on that cloud. And I'm going to start them off to the left, and then I'm going to slide them to the right. So I want to give enough speed, obviously, that they would be able to go on there. Okay, I'm going to take my controller. I'm going to click the lock up here so it doesn't disappear. I need this to stay here so that when I click on the cloud, it still is up there. If this is not clicked, that'll go away. So I want to keep that controller locked up there. I'm going to go to the cloud, and I'm going to animate this X position. Go ahead. Yep, right up here. Oh, does it? Yep, sorry. I'm going to alt-click on X position, and then I'm going to tie this cloud speed into this, okay? Now, if I just drag this here, whatever number is there, that's what this is going to equal. So I don't want to just have that number there. I want to use it as a multiplier of some speed, right? So right now we're at a negative 1,085. Let me jump to Notepad real quick so we can see this. So my cloud is equal to negative 1085. Okay, so that's my current value. If I tied those together right now, what would my cloud's value be? If I tied it to just this cloud speed, 0, right? So I don't want it to be 0 because it'll shoot it like really far off to the screen. What I want to do is have the cloud speed just gradually moving like this, and then if I type in 5 there, it's going to move 5 times as fast. If I type in 10 there, it's going to move 10 times as fast. If I type in 0.2, it'll move 0.2 times as fast, okay? So a simple one we can use is just time, right? every frame time will gradually increase. So it'll gradually move along there. If I multiply the time times the cloud speed, that will give me something where I can control how fast this is going. And then what I have to do is subtract 1085 from it. That way it puts it at this spot, and then it starts to gradually move. Okay? Now I'm going to check this to see which direction it's going to go. So if I drag it this way, this is going in the positive direction, so that works. So that as it goes, it should gradually move across the screen. So I'm going to Alt-click here. I'm going to set this to time times this slider minus 1085. Okay, it stays in the exact spot because I'm at 0 here. So if I took the time, which is 0, multiplied it times 0, that gives me 0. And then I subtract 1085, it puts me in the exact spot that I'm at. If I hit play, what's it doing? Staying still, because it's still 0 times 0, right? Now let's set this to 10. Now we hit play. Is it moving? No. Yes. It's moving super slow. Yeah. You can tell, right? Because if I go here to 10 seconds, I jump back, I drag it, it goes very quick, right? So very quickly, we've created the slider that controls how fast this is going. Now, this might be a little bit too subtle of a thing. So I'm going to put in another multiplier inside here. So I'm going to put times 50 times the cloud speed, okay? That just gives me the ability to not have to type in 500 here to get the same result. So that's 500, right? If I put in this times 50, so time times 50, that's going to shoot off the screen. Okay, so now this number is 1. So just so we can do the math real quick, we're at 2 seconds. So 2 seconds times 50 times my cloud speed of 1. 1 equals 100. Oh my God, did you see that? I didn't have to type that in. It automatically did it. I've never known it could do that. And then minus 1085. Oh, come on. Equals, there we go, equals, it needs the equal sign. Negative 985. So now this is automatic. So the clouds right now are going at this speed. If I wanted to have something that's a little bit more animated, a little bit more moving, I just change this to, let's say, 3. And now that cloud's going to go obviously a lot faster. Okay? So it's not always about just like creating a control, it's about creating a control that works very well. Think of if we had it the other way without that times 50 in there, it would basically be times 500, and then to go to the next value that would do something big, it would be times 1,000 times 1,500. So this, 1, 2, 3, it makes it very easy. Okay, so that's actually a pretty good speed. Now, once we have this set up once, I can copy this, and then just go to Cloud 2, and then Alt-click, and paste it, and then just update that number there, okay? Now, this is a positive 309, so I'm going to put plus 303.9. Just round it to 304. There we go. Hit play, and then verify that they're moving. Now, we do have an issue here, obviously, because it looks stupid, both clouds moving at the exact same speed. So, instead of this one being times 50, what if this one is times 30? So now we have 2 clouds going at 2 different speeds. Okay, this is the thing with rigging. It makes it a lot easier for us to do these kinds of things. Oh, look at that one's going right in front of the mountain. All right, so let's copy this again. Let's go down to our 3rd cloud. We'll paste that. And then we'll set this one to be 10. Actually, let's do this one as 20. And then its number is 1494. There we go. Some of them are kind of bunching in each other. I'm going to put this one at, I think, 5. I'll have that one move really slow. Now keep in mind these are going a bit quicker just so we can see it. Put that back to 1, and then we have something that's a little bit more feasible, right? As we do our animations, we don't want to take away from what the characters are doing, so we want it to be very subtle. All right, that's a little bit too subtle on that one now, so we'll just adjust that. I'll put it back to 15. There we go. Okay. Now, let's say that we're doing something where we want these clouds to be obviously a lot more animated. I don't know why this cut off so much. Let's thread that out. Right, so right now they're kind of bunched there and they just stop. Okay, so part of rigging is also knowing different ways you can set something up. So I'm going to duplicate this cloud. I'm just going to delete that keyframe from there. So this is all by itself. I'm going to hide my other clouds so we don't see those. And instead of doing this using position, I'm going to jump up here to my distort. No. I know where it is over there. I just want to find it here first. Image control, immersive keying. There's too many things. Perspective. No, it's not perspective. Oh, it is there. I was just thinking of the wrong letter. Offset. There we go. So now with offset, if I click and drag this, it does that. That's not right. Do I want to do that? I want to venture into that. No, that's not going to work for this one, so I'm going to delete that. Okay, I'll do that one on a different one. I forgot that it would cut it off like that. All right, so I'm going to leave my clouds like this, like that. And if I wanted more clouds, something that's off screen that would then come onto the screen, I could always duplicate these clouds, go into my position, go into this, and just change this number. The more negative this is, the more it's going to push it that way. So if I made this at 3, you'll see it's way over here. And obviously I could change the Y position of it. I could change the Z position of it. And then now as they get here, I'll then get another cloud coming into the mix. Okay? So again, that's something you may want to do. Okay. Where are my controllers now? It's gone. Oh, there it is. Oh, I was on the effects control. Why is that? That's weird. All right, so there's my cloud speed. So that's one piece that I've rigged. Okay, so I can zoom out, slide this over. I'll put a little check mark there. And just so you can see, you have this too, like to-dos, and then you can click that. We want to create some camera rotation or some camera movement. So I'm going to go to Layer New and make a camera. There is, yep. Yep. So we're going to make a 1-node camera. A 2-node camera has 2 different controls, and it's set up a completely different way. So just avoid the 2-node for now and just stick to the 1. And this I'm going to set to be anim cam. Yeah, animated camera.
I think that's kind of what I kind of figured that's what I found.
So here's the camera. Now if we go to a top view, like this, there's my camera. And if I zoom out, you can see here's all my layers. So there's that diorama box all layered like this. There's my camera. Now, if we're going into the scene, like you were saying, the camera would be animated along, let's say, the Z direction going into the scene. If we're going left and right, we would animate it this way. If we're going vertically, we would go into the Y direction. We can't see it from here, but it would go up and down. Typically, you're going to want all 3 of these to be controlled by the camera, okay, or by something.
What about, like, if you wanted to rotate the camera?
Yep, we can add that too. Okay, so I'm going to go into my backdrop controller, and I'm going to add another controller here. Now, we may want to go into the scene, we may want to go left and right, and we may want to move it up and down. So under my expression control, I need 3 different controls just for position. So I'm going to go there and I'm going to say camera position. Okay, right now it's set to 50, 50, and 0. Let me see what my camera's positions are at. 640, 360, and negative 1778. So I'm going to type in those numbers. And then I'm just going to alt-click this position as one big whole number, drag it to that, and then click off. Okay, so now this controller up here is controlling the camera. So as I click and drag this, now I can see all of those things moving. If I want to go into the scene, I use my Z, and then I'm able to go into the scene. Okay, if I want to go vertically, I can go vertically. Okay, now we can control the rotation as well. So let's do the same thing. I'm going to go to my controller. I put this camera at the bottom of the controller. I like to have the controller at the top. It makes it easy to see where it's at. Expression control. And then this one, we can't just use this 3-point controller because we're going to have 3 different ways we're rotating the camera. So we want to use an angle controller. So I'm going to say camera rotate, we'll call that X. I'm just going to duplicate it and then hit enter and rename this to Y, and then duplicate it, hit enter, and then rename that to Z. Now we probably don't need all 3 of those. If I go to the camera's rotation and I rotate this in the X direction, okay, it's doing that. That's not really going to help us. This obviously is going to move that way. And then Z will give us this, like, spinning effect, right? Typically, you're not going to need the spinning effect one. Typically, you only need the 2. So I'm going to get rid of this one. And I'm just going to use the Y and the X, okay? Now, the other thing we should look at is, let's see where this is pivoting from. So I'm going to go back to my top view here. And if we look at this thing, how it's set up, as I rotate the camera, you can see where it's pivoting from. Obviously, that works because it pivots from where the camera is, but it might make more sense to have the camera actually pivoting from, like, our first object. That way, as we get into the scene and we're going left and right, it feels more like we're centering or we're focusing on this object and moving around it, okay? Versus what we'd have to do otherwise is rotate the camera and then move the camera as well and try to sync these things up. So I'm actually going to go into my camera here, and I'm going to remove these positions because I need to set up something else so that I can control where the camera is actually pivoting from. So I'm going to go into make a new null. Maybe I can just do it through this. Let's see. No, I can't. Okay. I'm going to make a new null. I'm going to make this null 3D. And you can see right now where the pivot is, it's right here. So if I were to take the camera and parent it right to that null, that's where it would be pivoting around, okay? Let me switch to a front view just to look at this too. Yep, it looks like it's pretty much centered exactly where I would need it. All right, so now I'm going to call this camera control. Camera null, let's put it that way. Okay, so I'm just going to take my camera and I'm going to parent it to camera null. And now this null is what's going to be positioned and rotated. Okay, so that's what I'm going to use to control all my stuff. So this position is the one I'm going to alt-click and drag it onto this position. Okay, and as far as we know, or as far as we're concerned, this is going to work the exact same way. The rotation, I'm going to grab this, and same thing, the X is going to do that, and the Y is going to do that. So let's go to the X and drag it onto here, and let's grab the Y and drag that onto there. And now as we zoom this into the scene, whoops, wrong button. As we zoom into the scene, and then we start rotating. Nope, you're not rotating correctly. Let's go back to our top view. There's my null. It's definitely rotating better than it was. I think we're just still maybe too far away from it. Let's see. Yeah, so that's a bit better than what we had before. Okay. So we obviously still have a little bit of movement we're going to have to do on our stuff. There we go. Okay. So that's going to give us just a little bit better pivot than we had before. All right, so that works. Let's squish this in. Let's scoot that over. Cool. All right, so now we have camera controls. Let's put a little check mark, and that one's done. And then some of the things we may want to control are the depths of the items. So, go. So now we're going to make another controller that's just going to be expression, and this will be a 3D. And we'll call this one mountain depth. So here's all my mountains. And I did give them obviously some variety in where they're positioned, X, Y, and Z, or the Z direct dimension. So this is 55, 42, 43, 4,000, 4,500. I'm going to put these in some sort of order. Once we go into 3D, the layer stacking matters a lot less. All right, so 4,000, 4,250, 4,350. Okay, so we can do this a couple different ways. We may want to give the person control over maybe one or two of these mountains. We may want to give them control over all of them or whatever it is. Let's say just these individual ones. Okay, the mountain range I'm going to lock in, but these two individual ones, maybe I want to give them control over those. So I'm going to go into the separate dimensions. I actually don't need 3 here. I guess I can just use the 1. No, I guess I'll use 3. I'm going to alt-click the Z. I'm going to drag this up to the Z number. You can see how I don't have to do it to the whole slider. I can do it right just to that number. And this is at 4,000, so I'm going to put, let's say, times 4,000. Okay, so 0 times 4,000 is 0. If I put 1 there, it puts it back to where it was. If I put 0.25 there, it'll move it. 0.5. 2, it'll push it back further, okay? In this case, where are we at? Right here. I'm going to just put plus 4,000. And then now I can control this, just kind of sliding it left and right. Okay? And then if I needed to, I can just manually slide this up and down or left and right. Or I can tie it into these values. So I could have these be mountain 1. And I'm going to unseparate these. I'm going to alt-click, drag it to the whole thing. And then just reset this to 4,000. Re-slide that over. Re-slide that down. Okay, so depending on the kind of control you're trying to give the person, we can go into each specific mountain, give them control of that, or we can go into just the Z dimension and just give them control of the Z, where they would control that. Okay, so that's going to be up to you how you want to separate that. I can duplicate this again, alt-click the next mountain, and drag this onto it. And then I'm actually going to add that little plus that we did before. And that way I can reset this to 0, 0, and 0, and that goes back. I think that's going to be a little bit better than what we had before. Plus here, 0, 0, and 0. Good. All right, so now with this setup, we have obviously the ability to control the positions of these mountains. We have the speed of the clouds, and then we have the position of our camera. Okay, you may have other stuff in there as well. I might have more mountains. I might have different things, like I might have birds flying across the background. I may have a sun. I want the sun to spin, something like that, okay? Mm-hmm.
So when you do the birds, do you have to have a bird at different like type of positions, like with the wings, or you just
You could do them different ways. So the same way I'm going to show the rigging for the character, you might have something like that. Typically, it really does depend on the kind you have. I found green screen footage of birds and just cut out the green screen and just used that and just kind of moved it along the screen. Or you could draw different poses and just cycle them between the poses of how the birds would fly. Let me save this so we don't lose it. Folder. N. Okay. So that's going to be my environment. Now I'm going to go into a new project and import my bird. Same way, retain layers, hit import. And then there's my bird. Okay. We're going to do the same setup here. Now, the only difference is that I don't want to have all of these things in the same layer. I definitely could. Let me consider this for a second. No, we can do it right here. We'll just hide the layers so we don't see them inside there. That's fine. Okay. So I'm going to go to another null object. I'm going to use this in a specific spot now. I'm going to put this right at the bottom. Okay. Now, unlike the environment, there's no 3D on the actual bird. Okay. The bird itself will be a 3D item that will move along with our environment, but he will not be. Okay. So I do need that in another composition. I just remembered. Okay. So I'm going to drag the vanilla bird into a new composition, and that's where I'm going to create this. That's why he needs to be in a different comp. Vanilla bird. And this will be bird controller, or you can give him a name. Now this is going to be the trickier part, is because the items are all inside here, but the controller is right here. So we're going to be bouncing between these two compositions, get rid of that render queue, to get this to work. Okay. So I'm going to go to the bird controller, and I'm going to create all the controls for it. So again, we'll jump to OneNote, and I'll say bird. And then what things do I want to do? I want to have left, right, pupil control. I want to do hair control. I need beak opening. And then I need some squish and squash. Okay, you might have other stuff, but those are the basic ones that typically you would you would add. And then of course we'll add check boxes to these, so we can check those off later. So we can add these in here real quick. So the pupil controls, I'm going to need 2 of these, and they're going to be point controls. So this will be left pupil. I'll duplicate it, right pupil. I'm going to have the beak opening and closing. So I'm going to go to expression control here, do an angle control. Let's duplicate that again. Feather top, or front, feather mid, feather back. All right. And then we have our squash and stretch. So I'll need for the expression control and slider. And this will be squash, and this will be stretch. Okay. So I'm just going to hide all those so I can focus on one at a time. Okay, so just like before, I need to lock this so I can go into the other composition and then control all this stuff right here. Okay. So I'll start off with just the right pupil. And just to keep them in the same order I have here, left pupil, right pupil. I label these, remember, as this is his right, not my right, it's his right. These are pretty easy to do, so if I just Alt-click on this, drag this to the point, and then do a plus, add it to the original one, I can just reset these back to 0, and the pupil will go back to where it was, and then I have control of how the pupil is moving. Okay, so I'll do that again so we can see it again. So I'll go to the left pupil, Alt-click, drag it, oops, open it up first. Drag the pick whip to point, go to plus, add this one, and then just reset these numbers to 0. Okay, now you will notice a little bit of a delay when I'm in this composition and I'm changing my numbers. As I drag it, it doesn't update. Once I let go, it does update. Now that's going to be annoying, but when we're in our original comp and we're doing this, it'll update live. Okay, so just be aware of that. Cool. All right, let's do the feathers. So the feathers here, I'm going to do a rotation on them, so they just kind of rotate downward. So I'm going to go to my rotation, and I'm going to test it out first. Okay, so what do I need to fix before I do anything? Anchor point, right? So let's hit Y, drag the anchor point down to where it should be rotating from. About there, good. Now I'll grab all these and just do all these before I move on to the next step. That one there. And obviously you want to spend some time to get this right because you don't have to come back to this later and fix it. Like I know exactly it should be right at the center of that rounding area. There we go. Okay. Good. Rotation, rotation, rotation. And front, mid, back. So front. Front, mid, back. Okay. So I'm going to alt-click on the front feather, drag this. Open these up first. There you go. Drag this up here. Alt-click on the middle one, drag that up there. Alt-click on that one, drag it up there. Okay. Jump back to this comp so I can live preview it, and then see what it looks like. So now I have control over all 3 of those. Okay. Now I may want something that will control all 3 of those. That's something else I could add to this. Let's go. I'm on the bird controller. I'm going to go to Effect, Expression Control, and I'm just going to do another angle control. And then what I'm going to do inside here is I'm going to say all feathers. And what this will do is it'll allow me to control all the feathers at the same time. That way I can kind of move everything and individually, so I get like double control of it. I'm going to slide this up to where the feathers are right there. I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to do an alt-click on the feather front, drag this to all feathers, and then add in their own angle. Okay, same thing I did with the pupils, but now I'm doing it to an expression control. So I alt-click on the angle for the feathers, drag this to the angle for all the feathers, and then add itself back into it. Alt-click on the back, drag this to all feathers. It doesn't matter if I drag it up here or I drag it down into this area. It still is the same thing. There you go. Okay. So now I have control over all the feathers at once, or I have control over individual feathers. Okay, so it just gives you, again, a level of animation as you're animating your character. I keep forgetting to check my stuff. Check that, good. Okay, let's, on the next on the list is the beak opening. Okay, beak open is right here. So we're going to do this a couple different ways. I'm going to do the straightforward way first. So here's just beak top and beak bottom. So I want to test out my animation. So I'm going to go to my rotate. We have the same problem. The pivot's in the wrong spot. Yep. Let's just move this back to where it should be pivoting from. Test it out again. That's good. And we just alt-click. Drag this up here to beak open. And we don't need to add the number in there because it started off at 0 and the default is 0. So I don't need to add the number in. It's only when this number here is already something that I would add the number back into it. So now, oops, let me jump back to this so I can preview it. Now we get the animation. Okay. Yep, good. Okay, so that's the straightforward way. Now, we talked before about, the way that birds animate their beaks. I believe they both would open and close. I don't think it's like a jaw where just the bottom moves. So let's say I went to the beak top. I went to its rotation. I put its pivot in the right spot. And I would alt-click this and drag this onto that same beak open. Okay? So now when I go here, now I'm getting this. Now that's obviously not right at all. Okay? What should happen is the bottom moves this direction, the top moves the opposite direction, right? So if this is 0 and this moves, let's say negative 20 degrees, what's the other one doing? Positive 20, right? So it should always be the opposite. So if I come back to this beak top one, and I just multiply this times negative 1, we're going to get some crossing, that's fine. But we should have this spot where we can then go here and control that. Okay, now you'll notice this is super sensitive, right? So as I drag this even a little bit, it's like jumping. This is where we can use some math and just do some very basic things. So let's jump over here real quick just so we can look at this. So if I set the beak's value to 30, that's like me dragging the slider to 30. But what if I took this and multiplied it times 0.25? What would that give me? Watch this. Boom. Right? It gives me lesser values. So if I'm able to slide this thing very far and have it increment slower, it gives me more control over that animation. Okay? So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to multiply these times 0.25. Okay? So one is times 0.25, the other one's times negative 25. So now let's jump back to this. Let's slide that. And look how much smoother that feels, right? Even though I'm up at like 48 here and 60 there, that feels a lot better than it did. And I can even make that smoother even more by doing times 0.125. The number doesn't matter. You can do 0.1, 0.9. Try something and see.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Is there a way to sync that up with vocals?
With what?
Vocals, or you have to do that manually?
There actually is. There's a tool called Character Animator with After Effects where you could do basically you animate, you mouth all the words and it will sync it up, like motion capture. I've never done it, but I've had students in the past who have figured it out. Typically what we do though is if you get something where you look at remember the waveform that we see? If you look at that, you can see where there's no audio, that mouth would be closed, and then where there is audio, then it would be cranked up, right? So you can kind of just do that. For something like this, it's very easy to do just kind of looking at it opening and closing, very Muppet-like. When you get into the class next door and they're doing full-blown lip syncing with different poses for the mouth, it's much more involved. All right, so that's straightforward opening and closing the mouth. If you had eyebrows there, it would be the same thing. So if you had these eyebrows that were like this or like that, you could do pretty much the same way. It's just rotation is what you're controlling. All right, so now let's look at the other one where we're swapping between different items here. So I'm going to turn that beak off and turn these beaks on. Okay, so I have one beak that is closed and then the other beak that's open. Seems to be a disparity between the two sizes here. Let me just scale up beak closed a smidge. The pivot for this doesn't matter. I'm just moving the pivot so that I can scale it up some or scale it down some. There we go. All right. So what we want to do is I have two poses here, and I'm just cycling between these two poses. That's all I'm doing. So I'm going to go to, back to this. I'm going to go back to my effect control or expression control, and I'm going to create a checkbox. And call this beak open. Okay, so this checkbox will just turn on. The beak is on, the beak is off. That's all it's going to do. Okay, so I'm going to go to opacity for each one of these, and we'll start with beak open. I'm just going to alt click this and then drag this onto the checkbox. Okay, let's go test it out. I'll click the box, and then let me turn the other one off so we can see that. There we go. So I'm clicking the box. Is it doing anything? Well, look at the number right there.
Oh. So it's there, but you can't see it.
Right. Well, what's it doing? It's toggling between 0 and 1. Right? Because that's opacity, right? So it's a 1% opacity, we can barely see it. So if I just take this and multiply it times 100, now it's a toggle to go on and off. Okay? Now we want to do the same thing so that when I check this off, I want the other one to come on. Okay? So now this is going to be a little bit trickier because if I alt-click this, I drag this to that one, and then I say times, let's say negative 100. No matter what I do here, it's not going to toggle that back on because when this is off, this number is 0. So 0 times negative 100 will always be that. Okay? So we're going to jump over to this, and we're going to say if, else, expression. You shake your mouse back and forth while it loads, it helps it load faster. All right, so we're going to jump down to where they actually have an expression written right there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called an if-else expression. And what this does is it basically says, if this is true, then do this. If this is true, then do that. Okay, it makes it much easier to set up. So it says if this comp.layer blah, 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 blah is less than 500, make this 100, otherwise make it 0. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to delete this expression here. I'm going to put if, and you'll see it fills it in, parenthesis, this box. Now you don't have to actually put a value here. This is saying is less than 500. The fact that we're checking it on or checking it off is automatically going to give us a true or false setup. Okay, so we're basically saying if this box is checked, then we want this to be 0. Otherwise, we want it to be 100. And I've typed something wrong. Let's make sure that we have all of our parentheses done. There is unexpected token else. Let's make sure. If blank, there we go. I think I forgot my semicolon. Yep, that's what it was. I need a semicolon at the end of this. So if the box is checked, oops, it's not on. There we go. If effect beat control checkbox, put that at 100. Might have it backwards, else 0. All right, I guess we're going to make sure this is true. So is greater than 0. All right, now let's try this again with the other order I had. 0, 100. There we go. Cool. All right, so now let's take a look at that expression and see what it's actually doing here. Okay, so what we're doing is we're saying if that checkbox is greater than 0, it's checked, that means it's greater than 0, then set the value for beak open to 0. Okay, so we're setting beak closed, to 0. If it's not greater than 0, meaning that it is 0, then set it to 100. Okay, Now you could also do this as is equal to. So if I said if this is equal and you need two equal signs is equal to 1, then set it to 0. Otherwise, set it to 100. Now that should also work. Let's click that off. I didn't put 1 there, I put 0. There we go. There we go. So that works too. Now we could also copy this expression and put it up here and just swap these numbers. And it should work the same way. Okay, so somewhat straightforward. We just needed to add this other expression to our toolbox. Now I'll show you one more way that we could do this if we had several different poses. Okay, I'm going to jump into Illustrator, jump back to my bird, and actually let me make a new image here. I forgot my hotkey doesn't work, so I can't do that. All right, so I'm going to make this pretty obvious. I'm just going to make 3 different shapes. So this will be that shape. This one will be an ellipse. And this one will be a star. All right, so I have 3 different shapes, 3 different layers, shapes. And I'm doing this just to show it pretty obviously. That's all it is. Okay, so there's my shapes, 3, 2, 1. I need to cycle between these. Okay, so I want the viewer or the user to be able to control which one of these shapes we're getting. We don't want all 3 of these. So I'm going to go to each one of these things, grab them, and I'm going to pre-compose them, and I'm going to call this shape toggle. Okay, now if I go into shape toggle, I'm back to where I have these 3 shapes. So if this was mouth shapes, it would be the same thing. I'd have 3 different mouths in here. If it was eyes, ears, whatever, I'd have 3 different shapes. So I'm going to go to each one of these. I'm going to go to one frame, and I'm going to alt-click and drag, or bracket it, so I've locked these just to one frame. Okay, so it only exists right there. Then I'm going to offset each one. So now frame 0 is a star, frame 1 is a circle, and frame 2 is the square. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to this, and if I zoom in on this, you'll see how this is basically an animation of those 3 things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to control which one of these shapes I'm getting by using something called timer mapping. So if I go to Layer, Time, Enable Timer Mapping, this will allow me to delete this keyframe. And then just by punching in a number here, 0, I can get different values. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to my vanilla bird. This is going to be, let's say, a tattoo on his cheek. Right here. I'm going to drag my shape toggle into this mess. I'll put this right there. I'm going to scale it down so it fits on his cheek. I'm going to go into my distortion. I'm going to go to, actually I'll just go to 3D and just give this some rotation. There we go. Okay, so let's say that I want to control that tattoo and get it so that I can toggle between which tattoo I'm using. I'm going to jump back to my vanilla bird, go back to my bird controller, and go to expression control. Where are you at? Right there under E. And I'm going to do a point control. Nope. Slider control. Slider control. Must be tattoo shape. Okay, make sure it's locked. Back to my bird. Back to this. Make sure this toggle still works. Yes, it still does. Okay. Where is my timer mapping seems to have disappeared. Let me find that real quick. It's not there. All right, let me re-enable my timer mapping. Somehow it disappeared. So enable timer mapping. There it is. Okay. So now I'm going to tie this slider to this value here. So I'm going to alt-click this and drag this up here to my slider. So now whatever number I put here, there's 0, there's 1, that should have worked, and there's 2. Now this is setting it to 2 seconds. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of math here and just divide this by 24. There we go. Because it's 24 frames a second. So there's 0 is a star, 1 is that, 2 is that. So if I had different mouth shapes, same thing. I would just be toggling between these different mouth shapes that I would have. For an entire character, mouth phonemes, you could draw each one of these poses, let's say, have each one of these poses a different time on your time slider, and be able to jump between each one of these. Now, if you set this to, let's say, 0.5, it doesn't do anything. It only works when you're at 1 or 2 or 0. Those are the only 3 values we've set. Now, if I were to come up here and jump from 0 to 2, somewhere in the middle here, we would actually transition to the next one. Somewhere we should. Oh, I didn't set keyframes. That makes sense. I set a keyframe here at 2, and I come up here and set this keyframe to 0. Somewhere in the middle here, we would switch between that one. So typically, when we go from one pose to the next, we want to be right on top of it. So we would go 0 here, set a keyframe, go up one more frame, set that to 2, and then we would get this switch. And just for fun, let's just take this and make that onto an overlay. And it's dark, so it doesn't really show anything, so we'll just do that. There we go. Cool. So there's this tattoo shape. Cool. All right, so last thing I have to do on him is his squashing and stretching. So I'm going to go to that there. And inside here is where I'm going to do my squashing and stretching. So I'm going to go to my, let me see what I have. I have skin, just assessing what values I have here. I have my eyebrows, that. Okay. So I'm going to take some of these things, like these, and I'm just going to parent them to the skin. Okay. My feathers, my pupils, all this stuff too, parent those to the skin. Okay, my shape toggle, also parent that to the skin. Okay, I'm sorry, the pupils do not get parented. If I parented the pupils, they would actually squash with it. So I don't want that. Oops. No. My feathers will be parented and they will squash and stretch. So maybe I don't want those on there either. Okay, so just the beaks. No, I guess I don't want the beaks either. Just his eyebrows, I guess. Yeah, last semester was a little bit more complicated with what I had in there. This works good. Okay. So it's just the skin and then the eyebrows and my tattoo. So I'm going to put my pivot at the bottom here. And if I go to scale this up, you'll see it grabs both of these. That's not what I want. I'm going to uncheck the box. There's my stretch, or my squash. And then here's my stretch or squash. Okay, they actually work in conjunction with each other. So we have to tie those together. Squash and stretch.
The effect.
Oh, the effect?
Yeah.
Just scaling.
Oh.
That's all I'm doing is scaling it.
Unlinked it.
Yep.
Oh.
So I need to attach these things. So I'm going to alt-click on my scale here. Oops. Sorry. Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to alt-click on my scale there. I'm going to drag this to my squash slider. I'm going to come in here and just adjust this. Drag this to my stretch slider. And you'll see this is giving me a temp name. I'm going to call this squash. I'm going to go here and call this stretch. And then down there, I'm going to call it squash and stretch. Squash, stretch. We have an error, squash, stretch. I did not put a semicolon at the end of this one, or a semicolon at the end of that one. Yeah, it has to be right on. All right, so let's look at the expression real quick. So we're basically saying the squash is going to equal the squash slider. The stretch is going to equal the stretch slider. And then both of these things will be used as the x and the y. Okay. Now it did disappear. Why did it disappear? Yeah, because this is at 0. So put that at 100. Put that at 100. And now he's back. Okay. So now if I go here or there, I can control these two things. Now you'll see the issue that we're going to run into is that as he does this, his beak isn't going with him. Okay. Now if I were to go into this vanilla bird, and if I were to put the beak here and parented it to the skin, when we go into this shape and I'm doing this, the beak like squashes down and kind of flattens. So that might be something that you want. It seems kind of weird because it's more of a hard surface, so it wouldn't squash and stretch. Pupils obviously don't move too, so that's something that I need to adjust. But I'm going to undo that. There we go. And what I'm going to do is create controls for the position of the hair and position of the beak as well. Okay. So I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to go back to the bird. Go back to expression control and point slider. And I'm going to say beak position. I'm going to duplicate that and then say feather position. I like to line these up with where they're kind of connected to. So there's the beak opening. Here's the feather stuff. And then I just need to go into my feathers here. And you'll see that all of these are kind of like linked together, right? So if I were to create if I were to drag these, I alt-click, I drug the thing up here, or I drug the pick whip up to that feather position, it's going to set all of these values to be the exact same thing, and that'll basically stack them on top of each other, not give me nice stuff. So I'm going to make a new null, and this is very common for you to have like 15 nulls when you're doing this kind of thing. And this null will be my feather null. I'm going to parent all my feathers to the feather null. And then my feather null is the one that's going to be controlled by that thing. So I'm going to go to feather position here. And then I'm just going to add in this position. Okay. So now when I come into this and I do my squash, oops, like that, now I have a controller that I can move the feathers back down to where they belong. Okay. I have one for the pupils already, and then I also need one for the beak. So same thing. If I go to the position for these, I get two different numbers. So I'll make a beak null. All right, turn this off accidentally. Let's put this back here. And we're going to parent these two things to beak null. And then just alt-click, drag this onto beak position. Where are you at? There you are. And then just reset 0 and 0. And then, of course, add in that one. Cool. So now the bird should all be set. Obviously, there's a lot more controls here, but this is a lot. We're not dealing with 3D really as much. We're dealing with more of the controllers. So now we have beak position. We can move that around. We have beak opening and closing. Oops, I have the other one set up right now, this other beak open. I have my all feathers. I have my individual feathers, or my feather position. Let's move that up so it's all part of that. My front feathers can move like that. My mid feathers can move like that. My back one. I have squashing and stretching. And then I have my tattoo shape. There we go. I already did those. Remember when I set those up originally, they already had the position there?
Oh yeah.
Yep, so I can just move those as I do them. Okay, so now I'm going to save this as Sarcona bird. Okay, so that'll take you all the way through rigging the bird and rigging the character and getting those two things set up. Some additional stuff that we may want to work on, like I mentioned before, is if we were to grab screen birds. Okay, so you may have some footage like these that you add to the background. Not that. What that is. Something like this. So you can actually grab an image like this or a video like this, find one that's royalty free. This one says it's free, so they must have an area you can download it. What was that? They are horrible, right? But way in the background. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, there's a loop too, and you may, knock these back to, very, very minimal in the background kind of usage.
I think birds do more gliding than
Right.
Right.
Well, I think he's kind of like lifting off probably too. Zombie, drones, airplane.
Well, we get added to part.
Yeah, 50% off your first order. I think that's something else.
Or just find one of those free YouTube downloaders and just download it.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right, so I got my video. I'm going to go into my movies folder. Oops. Let me open up my background first. Because even if you don't use these as a team, you may want to just use them individually. You may want to add stuff like this.
I got a question.
Uh-huh.
So when we do this teamwork, are we gonna open up like a like teamwork project folder or something?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
You're doing your file. He's doing his file. When you're done, you'll switch files. You'll share your file with them. Then you just import both together, just like we're doing the title card in our animations. That way they're both in the same area.
Oh, I was about to ask about the title card. Like, are we gonna be using both of our title cards?
Nope, just yours.
Okay, but I'll do that after we're done with this project.
Yep, after you're done. Because remember, each person's animating their own.
Yeah.
So you're going to have your background that they rigged or your character they rigged. And then you'll go through and animate it how you want to animate it. And then put your title card, put your sound effects, put your other stuff in there.
I have my question.
All right.
So we have similar environment, similar character, but are we supposed to be completely separate animations?
You should have the same character, the same environment, but your animations can look totally different, right?
We're turning in two animations.
Correct.
All right.
You're turning in one, your partner's turning in one.
All right.
So if we
That
have
makes
like
sense.
a
Right.
plan for the scene,
Right, that's fine. You can still have the same plan, but obviously your keyframes are going to be timed different than their keyframes,
Oh,
All right.
right?
it's not going to be copying
Nope. You like in my case, I may have the character kind of bouncing here first, and then like doing a huge jump to the other side of the screen, or I might have him way in the scene, kind of jumping around, and then he jumps up right at the end of the camera, something like that. You got a question too, Blake?
Oh, yeah, so I was just clarifying, so now to the point where we're actually switching then
Right. You're gonna switch to do the rigging.
my background, he gives me the character, then I animate the character, he gives me the background, then we switch files again, or will we combine files and then
No, you're rigging the background. So right now I haven't animated anything. All we're doing is setting it up so that when you get the file, you can animate it. You can go into here and say, okay, this is the background all set up. I'm going to bring my character into this scene, animate the background, animate the camera, animate the character moving.
yeah, no, that's what I'm just clarifying, like, if I made the background, I'm animating the background still?
Nope. Well, I mean, you're going to animate the background, but right now you're,
Building the background.
right, you built the background. Which part did you do for yours? Which part did you create in Illustrator?
I created the background in Illustrator.
Okay, so you did the background in Illustrator, so you're going to give it to him. He's going to rig the background.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just making sure.
Right, and then after he's done rigging the background, he's going to give you back the background. You're going to give him the character,
Yep.
and then you'll put them together.
With those assets.
Correct.
Cool. I was just making sure I understand.
Yep. And then just so you can see too, like if you grab a piece of footage like this and you want to remove the green screen, this is pretty simple. You go to keying and you go to, there's a bunch of stuff here, so I'll just try the simplest one first, linear color key. Yeah, and then you click, and then you'll see there's still some green in there, so maybe I can adjust some of the matching tolerance here. It's pretty decent. Soften that some. There we go. Yeah. Yep. And there we go. And it goes like all the way, right? Looks pretty cool.
Yeah, that's what I said. You're gonna animate it.
Yeah.
But won't it look weird that it's a cartoon and it's not, those aren't cartoons, are they?
Right, but that's what he was saying. You can just colorize the whole layer. You can just take this and then go to Effect, go to Color, and then anything. Hue and saturation, just desaturate it, darken them.
I'll make them like silhouettes.
Yeah.
That'll work.
I mean, you could even colorize them and match your color scheme, and now you'll have that kind of look to it. You could even grab, if you're doing something that's kind of more stop motion-y, you can grab a couple frames of birds, sketch on top of them or whatever, and put those inside the scene, right? There's a million things you can do.
What's that called? Is it like mixed media where you have like realistic, like real life things in a cartoon?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, there's actually
What that is right there.
a technology I saw where they're able to